Orrin rode into Dry Gulch at sundown, when the light turned the ruts in the street into ribbons of fire. The wind came hard off the Badlands and worried the canvas of wagon tops like it meant to steal the very sound of the town. Dust rode his boots in a steady ghost behind his spurs, and his horse, old Buckskin, faithful as sin, steamed with that quiet impatience that only long miles could teach. He had left Dry Gulch years before with the kind of anger a man mistook for honor. He had told himself he was running from love the way other men ran from the law, because it was safer to be the thing that didn't need anybody than to be the thing that might beg. Now, a marshal's badge rode in his saddlebag, wrapped in oilcloth so it wouldn't catch rust. It was tarnished where his hands had touched it in private, like a bruise he couldn't explain. He'd worn it twice in the towns ahead of Dry Gulch, under lantern light and council room glare. Each time, men had looked at the star and forgotten his face. Here, in this place where everyone knew everyone's deaths and funerals, he feared the badge would do the opposite, make his own history stand up and point at him. Dry Gulch was not much to look at, and yet it had its own kind of beauty. A crooked main street with boards that sagged like tired shoulders, cottonwoods leaning over the creek as if they were listening, and fences built from whatever wood the last flood didn't steal. But to Orrin, what mattered sat on the corner where the street opened into a small, hard square. The saloon. It was the town's meeting place and its confessional both. A single building with wide doors that never seemed to close all the way, and windows fogged by tobacco and warm bodies. Its sign, painted years ago, flaked in strips like old scabs. People said the saloon was the only place Dry Gulch stayed civilized, as if civilization could be measured by the loudness of laughter. Orrin dismounted and led Buckskin into a hitch rail that had been repaired with wire and faith. He slid his coat off his shoulders and felt the ache where a storm had bruised him. The air smelled of hot leather, damp wool, and the sweet rot of spilled whiskey. Inside, the saloon held the usual world of sound. The clack of cards on scarred tables, the low scrape of chairs, the blunt laughter that came from men who had no other soft thing in their lives. The stove burned in the corner with an iron patience. Light pooled on the bar in a way that made the bottles look like small, trapped comets. Orrin pushed through the crowd like he belonged there, though he'd not been there for years. His coat hung from his shoulders with the weight of habit. Men in town had watched him ride in without speaking his name, because names carried ownership. For a moment, he thought he'd gotten away clean. Then the barkeep, Mae, looked up. Mae Hollister stood behind the bar with the kind of stillness that didn't come from peace. Her hands moved with practiced economy, towel in one, rag in another, a glass turning in the light as if it had been crafted by prayer. She was younger than he remembered, or he had grown older so that her age sat closer to the surface. Her auburn hair had darkened and pulled itself back in the same pinned manner that made her look ready for any sudden work. When her green eyes found him, the room didn't quiet the way it might have in a theater. It simply shifted, like wind moving across grass. Every man at the nearest tables felt it, though none would admit to hearing it. Mae's gaze traveled over Orrin's face, lingering on his chin where the split scar ran down like a thin, permanent river. He saw her mouth tighten, the smallest pull at the corner, not quite a smile and not quite a refusal. "Evenin, Orrin," she said, voice even as ledger paper. His throat felt too dry for his own name. Mae. He hadn't meant to let it come out like that, like he had not practiced being calm. "I didn't think you'd still be here." She set a glass down with care, the sound sharp enough to cut through the closer murmurs. "Dry Gulch keeps what it gets. Some folks say it keeps the same whiskey, too." A few men chuckled. Orrin didn't. He looked at her hands instead. They were steadier than they had been the last time he'd seen them, but steadiness wasn't always health. Sometimes it was a choice. "You been doing all right?" he asked. Mae leaned on the bar, shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. "Last winter almost took my lungs. But I made it through, didn't I? Town's still got customers." Orrin nodded, as if her survival were the only thing he needed to know. Yet the truth had started crawling up his ribs the moment he'd seen her. Mae had never been a passing thing to him. She had been the one honest light in a hard corridor of years. Back then, he'd promised her things he didn't understand. He'd meant them, and still he'd broken them. A man at a nearby table called out, "Marshal's due soon," and other voices answered with quick curiosity. Orrin's stomach tightened. Someone had heard something in advance. Dry Gulch was a town that measured time in rumors. Mae's eyes flicked toward the door, then back to him. She didn't ask about the badge. She didn't need to. Orrin realized then that the town did not only remember its own history, it rehearsed it. He took a stool far enough from the bar to pretend he had no claim. He placed his hat on the counter like he was setting down a burden. Mae poured him a drink without asking what he wanted. She gave him whiskey with a lean hand and a watchful stare. The scent rose strong, burnished by the stove's warmth. He tasted it and found it familiar. Mae's choice of strength, her way of making a man face his own pulse. "You riding for the law now," she said, not as a question, not as an accusation, as a fact that had grown roots. Orrin forced his fingers not to clench. "They offered. I took it." Mae's lips pressed together. "Offered. Like a man in need won't be refused." He looked at the bar's worn grain. He remembered their first winter years ago when she'd warmed her hands over the same stove and told him the world outside could not be trusted, but the right kind of work could. He had believed her with the kind of faith a man uses before he understands the cost. "You heard," he said. "I heard plenty." She reached under the bar and pulled out a rag. The motion was simple, yet her eyes never left his face. "Men come back from everywhere. The ones who don't come back don't get to be talked about. So we talk." Orrin swallowed. "So what now? You gonna throw me out?" Mae's smile arrived like a slow sunrise, thin and stubborn. "Orrin, I ain't got the room for throwing out. There's too many in need of a drink and too few to pay honest." He recognized the subtext. She had guarded herself by pretending the town's needs were the only ones that mattered. Before he could answer, the door opened and a gust of wind brought with it a different kind of presence. Silas came in, Silas Ketteridge, broad-shouldered and mean-jawed in the way that looked inherited. He had the posture of a man who expected chairs to move for him. Men at tables shifted like they were making room for a storm. Silas wore his coat as if it were always wet. His revolver sat at his hip with a leather brightness that suggested recent cleaning. He tipped his hat toward Mae without any warmth. When he looked at Orrin, something in his expression sharpened. "There he is," Silas said, voice carrying. "Orrin Graves, marshal now, I hear." Orrin stood halfway before he remembered he'd chosen a seat. He didn't like the way Silas said his name, as if it was a rope he could pull. Mae's rag paused in midair. For a breath, Orrin saw something flicker behind her composure. Fear held tight enough to pass for pride. Silas moved closer to the bar. "You come to Dry Gulch to make speeches, Orrin? Or you come to fix what got broke when you rode away?" Orrin's hands went numb. "I didn't break nothing." Silas chuckled. "You don't know what broke. That's the trouble with men who leave." Mae cut in, tone hard as flint. "Silas, you want whiskey or trouble?" Silas's gaze slid to her. "Both, Mae. Depends on how you answer." Orrin noticed then that Mae had already moved a key under the counter to her right side. Her fingers were ready to guard it. Not the building, not the bottles, the key. "What's in that office of yours?" Silas asked. "It's none of your business," Mae replied. Silas leaned in, close enough that Orrin could smell tobacco and the faint metallic bite of bullets. "Sure it is. Everything in Dry Gulch is my business if it keeps me paid." Orrin set his drink down and stood fully now. "If you talk to her like that again, I'll—" Silas interrupted with a raised hand. "Or you'll what? You'll show your new badge and pretend it makes you good? I've seen you ride before. I know what you run from." The words landed as if they'd been meant to hit a scar. Orrin's jaw tightened. Years back, he'd told himself he was leaving because the law was too corrupt for his heart. He'd told himself he was leaving to keep Mae safe. In truth, he'd left because he could not bear the way need looked on her face. Need made him feel like he'd never be enough. Mae's voice came soft, unexpectedly quiet. "Orrin." He turned toward her. She looked past him for a moment toward the office door behind the bar. Her eyes carried a message he'd refused to read back then. "What do you know?" Orrin asked. Silas barked a laugh. "He doesn't know anything. That's why he's so useful. A man thinks being the law means being blind." Mae placed a hand on the bar's edge as if anchoring herself. "Orrin, you asked what now. I'll tell you what now. Now you need to listen." Orrin's skin prickled. "To what?" Mae nodded toward Silas. "To what he's done." Silas's smile was thin. "Done? I do what keeps men from dying in the street." Orrin's eyes narrowed. "That's a lie." Silas's face darkened. "Is it? There's a man in town, came through with a ledger and a promise. He said he'd pay good if I helped him keep folks obedient. Folks like your friend Mae." Orrin felt the room tilt. He'd not expected Mae to be tied to anyone's scheme, not after he had left. He'd expected her to have moved on like a person forced to. Mae's expression didn't change, yet her fingers tightened around the rag until fabric creased. "You never touched me," she said. Silas looked amused. "Oh, I touched her plenty, Orrin. But not the way you mean." Mae's eyes flashed. "You talk too much." Silas's gaze sharpened on Orrin again. "I'm not talking. I'm reminding. Your brother, Elias, came through here years ago. He asked questions." Orrin's breath caught. Elias. His brother's name tasted like winter and blood. "Elias died," Orrin said, voice low. Silas shrugged. "He died, sure, but I got a notion you don't know how it happened." Mae inhaled as if she were swallowing the taste of iron. Orrin looked at her then, really looked. In the way her shoulders stayed squared, in the way she never once sat down after the talk began, he saw the difference between bravery and exhaustion. Silas's voice dipped. "Elias went after a deed, Orrin. A deed for Dry Gulch land. A deed he didn't earn and couldn't keep. He thought a woman behind a bar would be a simple answer. He wasn't smart enough to understand that women like Mae don't wait to be saved. They wait to survive." Mae's voice went brittle. "Don't you put Elias into your mouth." Silas grinned. "Then why keep the paperwork, Mae? Why keep the papers locked away behind your bar?" The air tightened. Orrin remembered that there was an office door behind the counter that customers were never allowed to open. He'd wondered what she kept there. He'd never dared ask because asking would be an admission. Now Silas's words made the room feel smaller. Orrin stepped closer to the bar. "Mae, what is it?" Mae didn't look at him at first. She stared at the whiskey bottle's label, and he saw her swallow. "It's not for you," she said. Orrin exhaled. "Everything in a town belongs to someone, even secrets." Mae turned her head slowly, as if moving her face like it was heavy. "You think I kept it for myself? I kept it so I wouldn't have to keep watching over your brother's mistakes." Orrin's heart thudded. "You knew Elias?" Mae's laugh was short and sharp. "I knew Elias, Orrin. I knew his handwriting. I knew how he looked when he pretended not to be afraid." Silas's grin widened. "And I knew how he'd paid me to make sure Mae stayed quiet." Mae's eyes turned hard. "He didn't pay you. He—" Silas struck the bar with his palm, not enough to spill, but enough to make the glasses sing. "He did. Elias Graves left a man's life on this floor and thought it'd wash off with prayers." Orrin's blood went cold. His mind raced to the last time he'd seen Elias, how his brother's hands had trembled when he tried to look steady. Elias had promised he'd be back. Orrin had believed him because believing was easier than grief. Orrin turned toward Silas. "Where's the truth?" Silas's eyes gleamed. "In Mae's office. In a deed signed by a judge in St. Louis. In a contract that says Mae was never the owner she pretended to be." Mae's mouth opened, then closed. Orrin watched her wrestle with whether to deny it or to tell it. The room seemed to wait on their breathing. Orrin said, "You never told me. All these years you never—" Mae's voice cut through like a knife. "Orrin, you rode away before I could even know what you needed. You left with your pride folded up like a clean shirt. I stayed to wash blood out of the sheets." His face tightened. "I left because you thought you were too much trouble," Mae finished for him. "Because you thought a man with a haunted past couldn't earn a woman's patience." He couldn't deny the words. They fit too well. Silas leaned back, enjoying their pain like a man tastes whiskey. "Now, Marshal, you gonna take Mae's papers? You gonna make the law move in Dry Gulch like it moves in the towns up the river?" Orrin's eyes burned. He pulled the oilcloth from his saddlebag earlier that day and had kept it like a vow. Yet standing here, he understood something bitter. The badge could be a tool. It could also be a weapon used by men who wanted order without justice. He met Mae's eyes. "Show me." Mae shook her head. "No." He swallowed. "Why?" Mae's voice softened, just enough to hurt. "Because if the deed comes out, you'll learn the part of your brother you don't want to know. And you'll learn what I did to keep myself alive." Silas's laugh rumbled. "Oh, she's a saint, all right." Orrin turned on him. "I'll decide that." Silas's eyes flicked toward the door as if gauging how fast trouble could run. "You won't get to decide nothing if you don't hurry. The man who hired me, he ain't just a ledger clerk. He's got men riding this way from the river towns." Mae's face tightened again. "Why didn't you say so before?" Silas shrugged. "I like the part where folks sweat." Orrin felt the danger climb up the back of his neck. If men were coming, it meant the saloon was about to become more than gossip and whiskey. It would become a battlefield. Orrin reached into his coat slowly and drew out the star badge. The tarnished metal caught the firelight, and for an instant, he saw himself the way men saw him. Law, authority, permission to command. He placed the badge on the bar between them. Mae stared at it. Something in her expression broke and stitched again. "You didn't wear it before." "I couldn't," he said. "Not until I came back." Mae's breath shuddered. "Came back to hurt me? To prove you're still able to leave?" "No," Orrin said, the word too raw to be clever. "I came back because I can't live with the way I ran. I rode years ago and told myself it was for you, but it was for me." Mae's eyes went bright, not with tears yet, but with a swelling that threatened to spill. She turned away for one quick moment, wiping her hand on the towel like she had soot instead of memory. Then she looked at him again. "You want the truth? Then you need to leave this badge on the bar." Orrin blinked. "What?" Mae's voice went low. "If you go in there as marshal, Silas will say you're stealing. He'll say you're taking what ain't yours. The deed'll be contested in court, and court ain't fast out here. But if you go in there as Orrin, just Orrin, then it's between us." Silas scoffed. "Between us? Mae, he's still a lawman." Mae turned her head just enough to give him a stare that could have frozen water. "Silas, you're still a thief, no matter what you call yourself." Orrin stared at Mae, realizing the subversion like a man tasting a hidden ingredient. He'd expected the badge to fix everything. Mae expected it to complicate it. "All right," Orrin said, voice steadying as a decision landed. He slid the badge toward her instead of keeping it visible to the room. "You show me as Orrin." Mae's fingers rested on the metal. She didn't pick it up. She simply touched it like it was a hot coal, and in that touch he saw how much she wanted to believe him, and how much she had learned not to. Mae reached for the key under the counter. The metal was old, scratched. She unhooked it, then set it in Orrin's palm. The key was warm from her body, meaning she had carried it close enough to remember its weight. Orrin closed his fingers around it. "Come with me?" Mae shook her head once. "If they're coming, Silas will watch you. If I go, he'll take it as weakness. But I'll stay where you can't be cornered without someone seeing." Orrin didn't like that choice, but he understood it. Mae had been choosing survival for years. Survival made men think she didn't need anything. Survival was a lie that kept her standing. Orrin crossed behind the bar toward the office door. The hallway space was narrow. The walls smelled faintly of paper, ink, and old tobacco. He heard the saloon crowd hush and resume all at once, the way panic does when folks pretend it's excitement. He unlocked the office door with the key and pushed it open. Inside sat a desk with drawers that didn't slide smooth anymore, a shelf of ledgers bound in cracked leather, and a small iron strongbox tucked behind a coat rack. Papers were stacked in careful piles, but the care was that of someone arranging a weapon. At the desk lay a letter, creased and refolded so many times the paper had softened at the creases. The handwriting on the top sheet was familiar. Orrin recognized the slant and the way Elias always pressed too hard on the downstrokes. A letter, and not written recently. Orrin picked it up with trembling care. The first line hit like a punch. "Orrin, if you ever come back, forgive me before you read." His breath stopped. He turned the paper over. At the bottom was a signature that made his stomach lurch. Elias Graves. Orrin's hands tightened around the paper. He had come back looking for answers about his brother's death. Here, inside Mae's private office, Elias had left him a confession. Orrin wanted to read it standing tall, as if pride could stop grief from breaking him. But his knees weakened. A sound came from the saloon behind him, shouting, quick and sharp. Orrin looked up. Silas had moved. When Orrin returned his attention to the room, he saw through the office doorway the movement of men outside the saloon through the windows. The first rider had arrived. Dust streamed behind his boots, and his face was set like a man who had not come to drink. Orrin stepped closer to the desk and found another item beneath the letter. A deed folder, tied with a ribbon that looked too delicate for the danger it represented. His fingers untied the ribbon. The deed's face was stamped and signed. Names carried weight. Names carried history. And at the center of it was Mae Hollister's own name, except the document showed her not as owner by choice, but by contract. Mae had signed, yes, yet the clause Orrin read next made his skin go cold. It said Mae's claim existed only while she kept possession of certain papers and while she kept the peace in Dry Gulch. Elias had arranged the contract. Orrin had never known. This wasn't a romance waiting to be rewarded with happy endings. This was a bargain made by desperation, and Elias had used Mae's life like a shield. Orrin turned the deed over and found a second sheet, an affidavit signed by the judge, dated years earlier, with an added notation in Elias's hand. "Orrin, I'm sorry. Mae didn't sell her future. She was trapped by my fear. I thought I could break it with time, but I was already dying. I left because if you stayed, you'd die too. If you read this, go to Mae first. Tell her you know I tried." Orrin read the lines twice, then a third time. His eyes blurred with something that wasn't just grief. He wanted to rush out and demand Mae's explanation, but the shouting outside grew louder. Someone had slammed into the saloon door. The crowd in the main room surged, and Orrin heard the jingle of a gun being drawn. He understood then that if the men coming for the deed arrived, Mae's careful silence would be shattered not by truth, but by violence. Orrin grabbed the deed folder and shoved it into his coat. He tucked Elias's letter in his inner pocket. His hands moved fast, but his heart moved slow with dread. He stepped into the saloon. Mae stood behind the bar, her face pale but her shoulders set. Silas stood beside her, grinning like a man who smelled blood. Across the room, the new riders, 2 of them, were pushing in with hard boots and harder eyes. Their guns were out in a way that suggested they were done asking. One of the riders spat onto the floor and looked at Mae. "Mae Hollister, you got the paperwork?" Mae's voice didn't shake. "I got what I paid for." The rider laughed. Paid? You was paid to keep still. We want what the contract says we own. Orrin stepped forward, blocking Mae's view with his own body. He raised the marshal badge from where Mae had placed it on the bar. The metal caught lamplight again. Men in Dry Gulch fell quiet, and Orrin felt the old town instinct. They wanted the law to mean something. I'm the marshal, Orrin said. The rider's grin didn't falter. Marshal? You got a badge, sure, but you ain't got the deed. Orrin held his breath. He could show them the deed. He could also take it to court where it might become another weapon. The frontier didn't respect justice without teeth. Mae spoke from behind him, voice calm. Orrin Graves, put it down. Orrin glanced back. Mae's eyes held his like a rope. You don't have to do this like a lawman. He understood her warning. If he handed over the deed, the men would take it and leave. Mae would still be the town's reason for why men vanished, even if she didn't deserve that burden. And Silas would keep grinning. Orrin's mind snapped to the twist he hadn't expected. Mae didn't need him to rescue her. She needed him to be the one to name the truth. He drew the deed folder halfway from his coat and let the riders see it. I got it, he said. The lead rider's eyes lit. Hand it over. Orrin did not move the folder. But you ain't taking it tonight. Silas laughed. Marshal thinks he can stop men with guns. Orrin's just being stubborn. Mae's voice sharpened. Silas, you said you hired men to make folks obedient. Now you'll watch what obedience gets you. Silas's smile faltered for a fraction of a breath. The riders stepped closer. Orrin felt the room's temperature shift. He could hear the stove ticking. He could hear his own pulse. Then Mae lifted her hand, pointing, not at the riders, but at the office doorway behind the bar. She got another letter, Mae said. Orrin's blood ran cold. He hadn't told Mae he took Elias's letter from the desk. Mae continued, voice measured. The one Elias Graves wrote. The one that says this contract was a lie set over Mae's life. Silas Ketteridge was paid to keep her quiet. That makes Silas an accomplice, not a businessman. Silas went still. In the flicker of firelight, Orrin saw his jaw working like a man trying to bite through fear. The twist struck harder than any gunshot. Mae had been waiting. She had held the papers not to protect Silas's schemes, not to protect herself alone, but to ensure Elias's truth could be used when it mattered. And she had not told Orrin because she had known the only way his pride would give her justice was if the town forced his hand. Orrin turned toward Silas. Is that true? Silas spat. It's not his business. Orrin's voice lowered. It's my brother's business. It's my life's business. Mae stepped out from behind the bar with the controlled grace of a woman who had learned to move fast without panic. She wasn't unafraid. She was simply done letting others decide the terms. She crossed to Silas and lifted a small object from her shawl pocket. A second key. On it was a tag with the judge's seal. Mae held it up so everyone could see. I kept the judge's second copy. Not in that office. In my own keeping. Silas's face contorted. You always was the clever one. Mae's eyes narrowed. Clever don't keep a woman alive without help. That help was Elias. Orrin stared at her, and his heart began to ache with a different kind of realization. Mae had forgiven Elias, and she had punished Orrin for leaving, but not because she wanted revenge. She had done it because forgiveness without truth was just another lie. The riders looked between Mae and Orrin, calculating. One of them raised a hand. I don't care who did what. Give the deed and we walk. Orrin exhaled, then reached into his inner pocket and pulled out Elias's letter. He unfolded it in full view. He read the lines aloud slowly enough for every man in the saloon to understand. His voice cracked on the names. He forced it steady anyway. Words mattered. The frontier didn't keep records out of kindness. It kept them because memory failed when bodies hit the ground. As Orrin read, Silas's grin died. Mae's shoulders loosened by a single breath, like she'd been holding the same strain for years. When Orrin finished, the room was silent with the kind of quiet that comes after people realize they've been participating in something uglier than they admitted. The lead writer's face turned hard. Judge's seal, contract, evidence. He turned toward Silas. So you lied about the papers? Silas's eyes darted. I didn't. Orrin stepped forward. The badge in his hand was no longer a trophy. It was a responsibility he'd failed to earn the right way, and now he had to use it. You were paid to keep Mae quiet, Orrin said. You were paid to keep Elias's truth buried. You're under arrest. Silas laughed once, harsh as gravel. Under arrest? By whom? By Orrin Graves with a badge and a letter? You think paper stops bullets? Orrin's jaw tightened. No, but words stop men from pretending. The writer who had wanted the deed holstered his gun half an inch. Not peace, but calculation. He didn't trust Orrin fully, but he trusted evidence more than brash promises. Orrin had expected a fight for the deed. He had expected Mae to be a prize he could win back. Yet the real battle was about naming the truth in front of people who had profited from silence. Mae watched him with eyes that held both pride and pain. The lead writer spat again, this time onto Silas's boots. Take him. We're done here. The riders moved to seize Silas. He resisted for a heartbeat, then realized resistance would turn him into a corpse with no deed and no future. He went quiet, too quiet. When the men dragged him toward the door, Mae stepped closer to Orrin. Orrin stood between her and the emptying crowd like a wall that had finally decided not to be proud. He stared at the deed folder, then looked up. Mae's voice was soft. You read it. I did, Orrin said. And now? Mae asked. Orrin breathed, the air smelling of whiskey and old paper. Now I know why I left. Elias tried to save you by making you the bargain. I thought you waited for me with love. I was too damn blind. Mae's eyes flickered. I didn't wait for you with love. I waited with anger. He swallowed. You still care? Mae's laugh wasn't cruel. It was tired and honest. You ask like love's some switch a woman flips when the man comes back. I've been loving and losing in the same breath for years. It ain't tidy, Orrin. He took a step toward her. The bar's edge separated them for a moment. The old boundary they'd always pretended was necessary. Orrin reached up slowly and touched her hand, careful like she was a wound that could reopen. Mae didn't pull away. I'm sorry, he said. Mae's chin lifted. You're sorry now because a badge told you to be. It ain't the badge. He let his thumb brush the crease of her knuckles. It's you. Mae closed her eyes for one moment, like she needed to feel whether hope would burn her. When she opened them again, she looked at him without armor. I left you in that saloon, Orrin, she said, not because I wanted you to suffer, because I needed you to live long enough to hear the truth. He froze. Mae. She nodded toward the office door behind the bar. Your brother wrote you a letter. I knew it was real the first time I saw his handwriting, but the men in town wanted you blamed for my trouble. They wanted a simple story. A simple story keeps people from asking hard questions. Orrin's chest ached. So you kept them from you by being stubborn. Mae's smile trembled. So you'd come back as Orrin, not as a ghost. That was the subversion, sharper than any gun. He had expected the twist to be about a secret identity or stolen deed. The twist was that Mae had directed the story all along. She hadn't waited passively. She had survived deliberately, holding the town's truth in her own hands until the right man returned with the right kind of humility. Outside, night settled deeper. The saloon's lanterns flickered as if they were breathing. The stove crackled and the air softened with the first hints of calm after danger. Silas was gone. The riders were leaving behind angry wind and scattered fear. Dry Gulch would talk for days, but tonight the town's noise was smaller, more human. Orrin pulled a chair close and sat, not at a distance now. He didn't hide behind procedure. Mae wiped the same glass she'd wiped earlier, though now it wasn't about work. It was about giving her hands something to do while her heart caught up. "You gonna stay?" Mae asked at last. Orrin looked up. He thought of the badge. He thought of the road. He thought of Elias's letter, of his own years of self-punishment. "I rode away to avoid love," he said slowly. "I thought I was protecting you. I was protecting my pride from being proven foolish." Mae's gaze sharpened. "And what you gonna do with it now?" Orrin met her eyes. "I'm gonna put it to work. Marshal's work. Orrin's work. Yours too, if you let me." Mae's breath caught, and she tried to hide it by leaning into the bar like she was steadying herself. "I ain't no prize you earn," she said. "I know," Orrin replied. "You earned yourself. That's what I should have noticed when I first walked into this saloon." Mae's eyes softened. "Then earn your place in my trouble." Orrin reached across the bar and took her hand fully this time. Mae's fingers curled around his like they recognized him by touch, not by time. He felt her pulse through her skin. The frontier didn't reward good intentions automatically. It punished weakness, rewarded courage, and asked for compromises every day. Yet in that saloon, amid dust and whiskey and the honest stink of survival, Orrin finally allowed himself to believe the complicated kind of love that didn't erase pain. It made pain bearable by sharing its weight. Mae leaned in, forehead almost touching his. Her voice was a whisper carried just above the stove's crackle. "If you leave again, Orrin, I won't wait. Not with anger, not with papers. I'll just close up and let the world chew on itself." Orrin's throat tightened. "Then I won't leave." Mae studied him as if weighing his words in a merchant's scale. "You promise?" He nodded once. "I promise." She exhaled, and a part of her finally unfastened. "Then come on, eat something hot. The night's been long for both of us." Orrin smiled then, small at first, then honest. The smile felt like coming home to a place that had always been waiting. He helped Mae set the last glass aside. He listened when she spoke about the office papers and what she planned to do with the deed, how she intended to petition the judge, how she intended to keep her name not as a chain, but as proof. The plans were messy. The frontier would fight them. Yet Orrin stood beside her, not in front of her. When the clock of the saloon finally settled into a slower rhythm and the last customer drifted into the dark, Mae closed her hands on Orrin's sleeve and guided him toward the back room where the bed sat under clean linen. The wind outside still carried dust, and danger was never truly far away. But the inside of that room held the one thing Orrin had refused for years, an honest choice. Mae looked up at him, eyes bright with tired hope. "Orrin Graves," she said, and the name sounded like a vow. He cupped her cheek. "Mae Hollister." He kissed her carefully at first, as if learning her again by feel instead of by memory. When she returned the kiss, it wasn't like surrender. It was like agreement. They stayed close through the hours until the stove died down and the morning light sifted in through the stained glass. In the quiet that followed, Orrin understood that the badge wasn't what made him worthy. Mae did.